Jeffrey Dahmer, the Milwaukee Monster. The beginning of darkness. Some of history's most dangerous people didn't hide in the shadows. They lived next door. They went to work every morning. They smiled at their neighbors. For more than a decade, one man quietly lived in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. To the people around him, he seemed shy, awkward, and unremarkable. No one imagined that behind the door of his apartment was a secret that would shock the entire world. When police finally uncovered the truth in July 1991, even experienced detectives struggled to process what they had found. The investigation became one of the most infamous criminal cases in American history and raised disturbing questions that are still discussed today. How could one person avoid detection for so many years? Were there warning signs that everyone missed? And what can this case teach us about failures in the justice system and the importance of listening when people report concerns? This is the story of Jeffrey Dahmer. Welcome to Shadow Files. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer was born on May 21, 1960 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. At first glance, his childhood appeared ordinary. His father, Lionel Dahmer, worked as a chemist, while his mother, Joyce, struggled with serious health problems and emotional stress. Their marriage was often filled with arguments, creating an unstable home environment. As Jeffrey grew older, he became increasingly withdrawn. Teachers described him as quiet and reserved. He rarely made close friends and often preferred spending time alone. When the family moved to Bath Township, Ohio, his isolation seemed to deepen. Although he occasionally tried to make classmates laugh with odd behavior, many believed he was simply an awkward teenager searching for attention. Behind the scenes, however, life at home was becoming increasingly difficult. His parents argued frequently, and the family slowly began to fall apart. For a young teenager, the constant tension left him feeling disconnected and emotionally isolated. By the late 1970s, Jeffrey's parents' marriage had reached its breaking point. In 1978, shortly after Jeffrey graduated from high school, his parents separated. His father temporarily left the family home. His mother moved away with Jeffrey's younger brother. For a short period, Jeffrey was left alone in the house. No relatives, no close friends, no one checking on him every day. Looking back, investigators would later wonder whether this period of complete isolation became a turning point in his life. But at the time, no one suspected that anything extraordinary was happening. To neighbors, it was simply another quiet house on another quiet street. In the months that followed, Jeffrey's life took a tragic direction. His excessive alcohol use became more noticeable, and his personal struggles continued to grow. The first known homicide occurred in 1978. Rather than describing the event in detail, investigators have pointed to it as the beginning of a pattern that would continue for years while remaining hidden from the public. What makes this case so disturbing is not only the crimes themselves, but also how many opportunities existed for authorities to intervene before 1991. Those missed opportunities would later become a major focus of public criticism. At this point, Jeffrey Dahmer was still unknown to the world. There were no headlines, no nationwide manhunt. No one could have imagined that this quiet young man would become the subject of one of the largest criminal investigations in modern American history. But the darkness was only beginning. We'll examine how Dahmer managed to avoid suspicion for years, the warning signs that were overlooked, and the investigation that would eventually expose the truth. I'm your host, and this is Shadow Files. If you enjoy carefully researched true crime documentaries, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next file is already waiting. The years no one was watching. By the end of 1978, Jeffrey Dahmer had crossed a line from which there was no return. Yet, outside his private world, life continued as normal. No one was searching for him, no one suspected him. To most people, he was simply another quiet young man trying to figure out his future. But beneath that ordinary appearance, his life was becoming increasingly unstable. A life without direction. After leaving high school, Dahmer briefly enrolled at Ohio State University. His father hoped college would give him a fresh start. Instead, his heavy drinking became worse. His grades quickly collapsed, and before long, he dropped out. Disappointed but still hoping to help his son, Lionel Dahmer encouraged Jeffrey to join the United States Army. For a moment, it seemed as though discipline and structure might change the course of his life. He completed basic training and was eventually assigned to Germany. Those who served alongside him often described him as quiet and distant. However, his alcohol abuse continued. Military life demanded discipline. Jeffrey struggled to meet those expectations. In 1981, after less than 2 years of service, he was discharged from the Army. Once again, he found himself without a clear direction, searching for stability. After leaving the military, Dahmer spent time in Florida before returning to Ohio. Eventually, he moved into his grandmother's home. His grandmother believed that giving him a stable place to live might help him rebuild his life. For a while, things appeared to improve. He found work. He attended church with his grandmother. Neighbors saw nothing unusual. Looking back, investigators would later say this period demonstrated just how ordinary he appeared to everyone around him. Nothing about his daily routine suggested the truth that would emerge years later. Missed warning signs. During the 1980s, there were several moments when law enforcement came into contact with Dahmer. Some incidents resulted in minor legal trouble. Others raised questions that in hindsight seemed more significant. Each time, however, the larger picture remained hidden. No single officer, no single witness, and no single report revealed what investigators would later uncover. The pieces of the puzzle existed, but no one had assembled them. Years later, criminal justice experts would point to these missed opportunities as an example of how fragmented information can prevent authorities from recognizing a developing pattern. Moving to Milwaukee. In the mid-1980s, Dahmer returned to Milwaukee. He found steady employment and rented apartments that blended into ordinary neighborhoods. To co-workers, he was quiet. To neighbors, he was forgettable. He rarely attracted attention. That anonymity became one of the most disturbing aspects of the case. The person who would later become known around the world was, at that time, almost invisible. The investigation that hadn't begun across Milwaukee, detectives were investigating reports of missing people. Most of those cases appeared unrelated, different neighborhoods, different circumstances, different timelines. There was no obvious reason to believe they were connected. Without clear evidence linking them together, investigators had little reason to suspect that one individual could be responsible. The case that would eventually shock the world had not yet taken shape. For years, Jeffrey Dahmer remained hidden in plain sight. The warning signs were scattered, the clues were incomplete, and the investigation that would eventually expose everything was still years away. The investigation begins. By the late 1980s, something was changing in Milwaukee. Reports of missing young men continued to arrive. Each case seemed isolated. Different neighborhoods, different backgrounds, different circumstances. To investigators, there was no obvious connection, but behind the scenes, a pattern was quietly forming, one that no one had yet recognized. The missed connections. As more missing person reports accumulated, detectives faced a difficult challenge. Many cases contained very little evidence. Some individuals had left home voluntarily in the past. Others had few witnesses to help investigators. Without forensic technology as advanced as today's, connecting seemingly unrelated disappearances was extremely difficult. Years later, experts would conclude that the information existed, but it was scattered across different reports, departments, and timelines. No one could yet see the complete picture. Questions without answers. Friends and family members searched for answers. Flyers were posted, phone calls were made, police interviews continued, but many investigations reached dead ends. Each unanswered question added another layer of uncertainty. As the years passed, concern continued to grow throughout parts of Milwaukee. Still, no one imagined that many of these cases would eventually point toward the same apartment building. A critical mistake. One of the most discussed moments in the case involved a police response that later received intense public scrutiny. At the time, officers responded based on the information they had available. Years later, reviews of the incident concluded that important warning signs had been missed. The event became a major lesson in police training, communication, and investigative procedures. Following Dahmer's arrest, the incident was examined extensively and several policy changes were introduced within the department. The case became an example of how investigative mistakes can have lasting consequences. A man who avoided attention. One reason the investigation took so long was simple. Jeffrey Dahmer rarely drew attention to himself. He maintained steady employment. He followed routines. To casual observers, he appeared ordinary. Criminal profilers later noted that appearances alone are often unreliable. Some offenders deliberately avoid attracting attention, allowing them to blend into everyday life. That lesson would become one of the lasting impacts of this case. July 1991. Then came the month that changed everything, July 1991. A routine encounter between Dahmer and one intended victim took an unexpected turn. Instead of ending as previous encounters had, this individual managed to escape and seek help from police. Within minutes, officers were speaking to someone whose account immediately raised serious concerns. For the first time in years, investigators had a witness whose information could be checked immediately. The investigation was about to move faster than anyone expected. Detectives were only hours away from discovering the truth. Behind one apartment door waited evidence that would transform a local investigation into an international headline. The quiet man who had lived almost unnoticed for years was about to become one of the most infamous criminals in modern history. But what exactly did investigators find? And how did those discoveries reshape the entire case? The apartment that changed everything. July 22, 1991. It was supposed to be another routine police call. Officers had been approached by a man who had escaped from Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment and reported suspicious behavior. At first, the situation appeared confusing, but within minutes, officers noticed something that immediately changed the direction of the investigation: a pair of handcuffs. When they asked Dahmer for the key, he calmly led them toward his bedroom. None of the officers knew that they were only seconds away from uncovering one of the most shocking crime scenes in American history. The search begins. As officers searched the apartment, they found evidence that strongly supported the survivor's account. The discovery quickly escalated the case from a routine investigation to a major criminal inquiry. Detectives secured the apartment, called for forensic specialists, and began documenting everything inside. Over the following hours, investigators carefully collected evidence while trying to understand the full scope of what they had uncovered. Experienced officers later said they had never encountered anything quite like it. Dahmer's confession. After being taken into custody, Jeffrey Dahmer agreed to speak with investigators. Over multiple interviews, he admitted responsibility for numerous killings that had occurred over many years. Detectives spent days comparing his statements with missing person reports from Wisconsin and neighboring states. Many families who had spent years searching for answers finally learned what had happened to their loved ones. The investigation continued for weeks as authorities worked to verify every detail through evidence and witness testimony. A nation in shock news of the arrest spread rapidly across the United States. Television networks interrupted regular programming. Newspapers devoted front pages to the story. People across the country struggled to understand how such crimes could have gone undetected for so long. Questions quickly shifted from "Who is Jeffrey Dahmer?" to "How did this happen?" Community members demanded answers. Police procedures came under intense public scrutiny. Investigations were launched to examine whether earlier opportunities had been missed. Lessons for law enforcement. The case led to important discussions about communication between police departments, missing person investigations, and officer training. Many agencies reviewed their procedures for handling reports involving vulnerable individuals. Experts argued that stronger information sharing might help prevent similar investigative failures in the future. Although no reform could change the past, the case influenced how certain investigations would be approached in the years that followed. Jeffrey Dahmer had finally been arrested, but the investigation was far from over. Detectives still had months of work ahead. Prosecutors now faced the enormous task of presenting one of the most complex criminal cases in Wisconsin history. The trial would attract worldwide attention, and the verdict would become one of the most closely watched moments in American criminal justice. The trial, the verdict, and the legacy. With the investigation complete, the focus shifted from the crime scene to the courtroom. By early 1992, the eyes of the world were fixed on Milwaukee. Television crews gathered outside the courthouse. Journalists traveled from across the United States and overseas. For many families, the trial was more than a legal proceeding. It was their first opportunity to hear the evidence presented publicly and to seek a measure of justice. Jeffrey Dahmer faced multiple counts of murder. His defense did not argue that the killings had not happened. Instead, the central question was whether he should be held legally responsible for his actions or found not guilty by reason of insanity. Mental health experts testified for both the prosecution and the defense. Each side presented different opinions about Dahmer's psychological condition. The jury listened to weeks of testimony, expert analysis, and evidence collected during the investigation. The trial became one of the most closely watched criminal proceedings in American history. After carefully reviewing the evidence, the jury reached its decision. They rejected the insanity defense. Jeffrey Dahmer was found guilty on multiple counts of murder. The judge sentenced him to multiple consecutive life sentences in prison, ensuring he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. For many of the victims' families, the verdict brought a sense of accountability, even though it could never erase their loss. The Dahmer case became more than a criminal trial. It became a turning point. Law enforcement agencies reviewed how missing person reports were handled. Departments examined communication failures between investigators. Training programs were updated to emphasize the importance of recognizing patterns across seemingly unrelated cases. The case also renewed public discussions about community trust, investigative procedures, and the responsibilities of law enforcement. Many experts continue to study the investigation as an example of both successful detective work and missed opportunities. On November 28, 1994, while serving his sentence at the Columbia Correctional Institution in Wisconsin, Jeffrey Dahmer was killed during an altercation with another inmate. His death ended one of the most notorious criminal cases in American history. But it did not end the questions. How many warning signs had been overlooked? Could earlier intervention have changed the outcome? Those questions remain part of the case's legacy. The story of Jeffrey Dahmer is not remembered because of one man. It is remembered because of the lives that were lost, the families forever changed, and the lessons learned by investigators and communities. Behind every headline was a real person with dreams, family, and a future that was taken away. Remembering that human cost is more important than remembering the offender himself. Thank you for watching Shadow Files. If you enjoy carefully researched documentaries covering true crime, unsolved mysteries, and historic investigations, consider subscribing and turning on notifications. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and remember, sometimes the darkest secrets are hidden in the most ordinary places.